Martin, good to see you. I was looking up our last conversation, which was back in March earlier this year, and at that time was right before your case was going to be heard at the Supreme Court. And, I've made mention Dr. J has been on here before a couple of times. Janine has been on here. And, it was the unknown of what was going to transpire over the course of 2024. And I don't want to put words in your mouth or describe how you're feeling. So I'm just going to ask you, as we're at the end here in December, with everything that took place back then and now, how are you feeling?
Well, I feel good in the sense that uh, we have been vindicated for the about the pandemic. I think the Great Barrington Declaration was the right thing. Sweden was the only major Western country that followed a evidence-based approach, and they have the lowest excess mortality during the pandemic. But of course, it's very tragic that we messed up so badly during the pandemic with school closures and other lockdown measures and vaccine mandates and so on. So hopefully we will learn and not repeat the mistakes. And the fact that we now have Dr. Jay Bhattacharya nominated for NIH director and Dr. Martin McCary for FDA director, I think is great.
So, the rumors were circulating around about Dr. J. And, every time when him and I even talk, and maybe I said this to you when we spoke earlier in the year, I'm always blown away. I'm blown away by the opportunity I get to speak with people like yourself and Dr. J and others. But I still can't get over the fact that there were Twitter files on him. Like he was that much of a threat that they had a file, a file. And I said that to him in our second conversation. I was like, I'm watching on the Hill, and they brought up your name. Like he's just such a threat that they had to have a secret log on him. It's unbelievable to me.
Yeah, and I think it's poetic justice that the NIH director during the pandemic, Dr. Francis Collins, he called Jay and myself and Sunatra fringe epidemiologists requesting a devastating takedown, and now Jay has been nominated to take his position as the next NIH director. So I think that's quite nice. I'm very pleased about that.
So what were you thinking? Because as it was circulating around, his name was being, the idea of him, getting nominated for that position. What was your first reaction when you heard he was even being considered for that?
I think that's what's needed to restore the integrity and trust in medical research and public health. So uh, there were so many mistakes, and we didn't use evidence-based medicine during the pandemic. It was thrown out the window by both NIH, FDA, and CDC. So now to have Jay to head NIH would be fantastic to restore evidence-based medicine. Uh, and that's absolutely needed. If we don't do it, then eventually, I mean, obviously the public know what the mess this was. So there's not going to be support for medical research unless the medical community and the research community changes and actually do it based on evidence instead of pseudoscience or other things or political considerations.
Yeah, and isn't he suing the NIH too? Are you part of that? Wasn't that? I thought I read that somewhere, which I find very ironic that you're suing the department that you're going to be the head of.
So we're suing the federal government for censoring us on social media. So that's called Missouri versus Biden. The case it was filed by the Attorney Generals of Missouri and Louisiana with five co-plaintiffs, of which I am one, and Jay is another one. Uh, and So we are suing them for violating our First Amendment right to free speech because the federal government uh, sort of put pressure on the social media companies to censor us, and we were censored. So I guess that is ironic. And so NIH is one part of that, but it's just one of several agencies in the federal government that is mentioned in the lawsuit.
Yeah, and is it Aaron Cariotti part of that as well?
He is part of that. Yes. and Jill Hines is another co-plaintiff.
What a world we're in right now, huh, Martin?
Yes, I mean it's shocking that I thought there was consensus for free speech and against censorship. So that was an absolute shock during the pandemic that there's no longer consensus uh, to have free speech. And as a scientist, it's sort of a shock to be censored for saying scientific truth. Um, so,
Yeah, I have to say, when we spoke, back in the first quarter, and then, it was right before your case was, I think it was the week after, if memory serves me, that it was going to be on the Supreme Court a week or two. And I wasn't feeling, it's just like, man, there's no wins here. It's like everywhere you go, you're just getting shot down, shot down, shot down. You know, I don't know if you were feeling that way, but I mean, how were you feeling back at the first quarter versus how you feel today?
so with the Supreme Court case, what happened was we requested a preliminary injunction, which means that the government has to stop censoring while the case is pending in the courts. And we won that preliminary injunction in the district court in Louisiana in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal, but we lost in the Supreme Court 6-3 for technical reasons. They didn't actually address the actual First Amendment or censoring. It was on a technicality. So the case is back in the district court now, and it will sort of go its usual phase. But it was disappointing to lose in the Supreme Court. But I think they wanted to protect the government, and the best way to do it without addressing the real issue of First Amendment, they decided to do it on a technicality.
So now, first, I know people are going to ask me, what if Dr. J comes calling on Dr. Martin Kulldorff to be a part of NIH or something within? Is that possible?
I always take his calls, and we always have discussions, and we talk usually at least a couple of times a week. But I will probably not be part of NIH, but uh, I guess who knows? But that's probably not going to happen.
The what would you first of all, what was that first conversation like with him after he was nominated? Should have grabbed that. Why didn't we do that on my podcast, Martin? That would have been great to hear. People would have loved that.
Well, I was thrilled when he told me that it's. I mean, we were hoping and expecting, so I was thrilled when he called and said that he's been nominated. So it was I was very very happy, and he was also quite pleased.
How does one start with an agency like that cleaning it up?
So I think at NIH, there are a lot of very very good scientists at NIH, like the rank and file scientists who do fantastic good work. So so I think that's the basis of it. And then you basically have to replace the some of the leadership. But I also think there needs to be some structural reforms at NIH. It's actually inefficient the way it works from perspective of the scientists. Um, and for yes, like one for example, research that's funded by NIH should be available to anybody, to the public, or to any physician who needs to read it. But a lot of it is published behind firewalls of expensive commercial journals, uh, published by Elsevier, Wiley, Springer, and so on. And this is the taxpayer-funded research, so it should be available immediately to everybody, I think. So that's well, like one small example of how NIH can serve the citizens much better.
Yeah, the lack of transparency and just the lack of trust that we've experienced over the last 5 years, which is, it's amazing that we're coming up on 5 years now since the pandemic. And, I've often internally asked myself, how do you restore it at this point?
I think there has to be a COVID commission who actually looks at what happened in great detail, different aspects of it. And then we have to restore academic freedom. We can't We have to have good science depends on academic freedom, and it also depends on having a civilized, open discussions between scientists. You can't call people fringe scientists or requesting devastating takedowns. You should invite people to discussions and open up that, and um, that's what creates integrity and trust uh, in the scientific community. And right now is at rock bottom. Good reasons. For good reasons. It should be there should not be trust for the scientific community right now after the COVID fiasco.
Well, and I think too, the general public, you don't know what you don't know, but that after that whole thing, the exposure of just the misinformation, lack of transparency, people like yourself and others that were getting attacked, your livelihoods being crushed. Uh, you know, I'm just I'm not optimistic that this can be restored, or how long would it take to get it back on track?
It might take a generation if it works. And I never doubted, like 4 years ago during the pandemic, I never doubted that the Great Barrington Declaration of focus protection would be proven right. Sorry, which it has. But I don't know if we will be able to restore scientific integrity and trust. But I'm more optimistic now with Jay as the new NIH director. I'm gonna get a glass of water. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's okay. Can you hear me while I'm can you hear me, Martin, or?
I can hear you.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you. Sorry about
No,
that.
it's okay. But what was your reaction when you first got called fringe? Amazing with the name calling and all that too.
Yeah, it was. I think it was both humorous and sort of. I think it reflected much worse on the CDC, Collins, the CDC director, to sort of engage in that kind of slander.
This is why I don't wear a tie anymore, Martin. I don't.
Yeah, well, that's good.
But yeah, I mean, to the point where I mean, they. What is it? What's the saying when you get called a name, you lose the argument, and they went so low as to call you guys that, and yeah, I just can't believe the level that we fell to during that period, and you're right. I mean, and that's where people think that like this stuff is going to get reversed quickly, and it just doesn't work that way.
No, it might take a whole generation. That might be an optimistic thing to restore integrity and trust in the scientific community. It might take a generation. It might never happen. I don't know. But we have to try to restore the integrity because science is important. Medical science is important. We need to live healthy lives, so we have to do everything we can to restore the integrity of the research community.
What are your thoughts on academia now and the state of that?
I think it's. I think there's a lot of very, very good rank and file scientists who are truly doing good work to find the scientific truth in different areas. But I think the scientific leadership failed completely during the pandemic, and there has to be a change there.
Do you think those institutions being, Harvard, Ivy League, are they salvageable?
I think that the reputation is taking a hit that would be very difficult or very take a long time for them to restore. Um, so I mean, in terms of scientific leadership, it's at the federal level, but it's at universities and other research institutes. It's also the scientific journals uh, um, that did not do a good job during the pandemic. So like the editors of those journals. So there's a lot of improvement that we have to work hard, very hard now the next 4 years.
Amazing how the lock, stock, and barrel of the journals, the universities, um, the agencies at the federal level, they were all in line, in sync, in carrying out this
Yep,
message.
yep, they were.
So if you say, you were in charge of, trying salvaging or restoring these institutions, where would you start in terms of academia or the federal agencies or the journals. Like, I feel like if you started working on the federal agencies, that would help get the college universities maybe more online, and then the journals.
I think the journals will be the easiest to salvage. I think we need a we should have open access. We should have open peer review where people the peer review is not secretive, but it's actually published together with the papers. So I think that that's the easiest one to I think restore. Um, the system of grant funding, that's of course NIH primarily, but also others. That's another important one. And then the third one is the promotion system that universities do. How making sure that it's promoted by merit and that the leadership of universities are actually excellent scientists and not just career bureaucrats.
Yeah, and that's I would think that would be the most challenging part with universities, right? With factoring the tenure, it's harder to replace those people.
Well, it's not the tenure rank and file scientist that needs to be replaced so much. It's more the presidents of universities and the deans and so on.
Which is not an easy feat to do either. So would you say that's more difficult on the academia level than it would be the federal agencies?
Probably, yeah. Um, but we'll see. I think that the NIH has a capacity to influence how universities operate because universities are dependent on NIH funding.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what when Jay walks in there that first week, what it would be like being the head of the NIH.
He has a huge challenge ahead of him. So, but I think he'll do very well.
For yourself, what are you up to, Martin?
Well, one thing I'm doing is starting a new journal that is not only open access but also open peer review, where the reviews will be published together with the articles, and where there is no gatekeeping at the article level, but gatekeeping instead at the scientist level. So any good scientist can publish what they want there, and then it will be reviewed openly, so there can be an open scientific discourse. So we're trying to establish that as a new type of journal to showcase that, and hope that other journals will then sort of follow and change the way they operate to a similar manner. So that should be launched in about a month or so.
What's it called?
Journal of the Academy of Public Health.
So look at you. You're taking matters into your own hands in terms of restoring integrity to the journals.
Yeah, and I think that's how I operated as a scientist. It's always to try to do things and create things very concretely. I think that's the way forward.
Some of your colleagues be part of this as well.
Yeah, so Jay is on the editorial board and many other prominent scientists.
How exciting is this for you? Moving into this next chapter. I mean, to me, I feel like it's more than just the work that you're doing. You're restoring America. I mean, a portion of this country. That's the way I feel, Martin. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you feel that way, but
Well, I don't have that amount of hubris. So I'm trying to restore the scientific enterprise, which is an important one, but it's, of course, is only a small part of America. And I think that the problems we have in academia is actually reflective of some more general problems that we have in society. I mean, the censorship issue is much broader than the science. So,
is that where? So, what other things do you think in academia that carry over to our society?
um, general tribalism, I think, in America, based on Democrats and Republicans, that's are now in academia also. Um, and that's very tragic because science used to be sort of everybody agree that we should do medical research and that we should do good research and we should have freedom of speech and we should. There was sort of very broad support from everybody for NIH to fund NIH to do medical research because we can't fund our own medical research. We have to do that as a society. So it's sort of strange to be in a situation where science has sort of become very polarized.
Yeah, and and also too, there's one of the biggest things I think, and you can, thoughts on academia, but in our society, there's just no accountability or integrity anymore with anything.
I think that's certainly true for science. There is not sufficient accountability and integrity. There were some cases where uh, people at Harvard were uh, basically doing fraudulent research. They were cheating, and but they are still employed by Harvard, while those who refused the vaccines, which were very unscientific because if you've had COVID, you don't need the vaccine, they were fired. So there's no accountability, I think, the way it should be in science. If somebody cheats or with the research by doing fraudulent science, that should not be accepted at all. You can do mistakes, that's okay. That's part of science to make mistakes, but you shouldn't make deliberate fraud. That's not okay.
Where do you think that all started at, and how long ago?
I think there's enormous pressure in the scientific community to get grants from NIH, and that puts some pressures to put some people to cheat.
How long ago do you think that started, where the integrity was compromised, accountability was compromised in order to get this secure funding?
I think it has been slowly growing. So it's been, I mean, there's been fraud in science, examples of that several decades back, but I think it's has been a slowly growing problem, and we have to reverse that to put it back on the straight footing.
So decades this has been going on, where the fraud, where it slowly
Well,
crept in.
I mean, if it hasn't been a huge problem, but it has been sort of a few bad apples, and there's still only a few bad apples, but I think it's more now, and it's not being dealt with in a forceful manner. I think it used to be dealt with more forcefully. I mean, the president of Stanford had to step down because there was some fraud in some of his papers. So that's good that he stepped down, was forced to step down, but it's we shouldn't have this at all, I think.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where the general same coming back to the general public, they would have no idea, and who's going to challenge a high up administrator of one of these institutions?
Yeah, no, they are, but there are brave scientists who do challenge them, who do point it out, who detect that this is a problem, and then they do challenge them. So there are brave scientists who do that. I don't think they do it for personal gain because I don't think there is a personal gain in it, but they do it because they care about the integrity of science.
Is it now? Is COVID in a way, it exposed all this, and is it given the ability for more people like yourself and others, scientists in terms of science, to speak up and speak out more, and especially in academia?
So I think that the problems in academia was there before, and maybe I and many others we were sort of naively we knew it was there was some problems, but we were sort of just carrying on our work. But the COVID pandemic really put it at the forefront. All these problems came to the surface very strongly. So it has really the pandemic has really exposed the problems.
Yeah, and is especially to the. I mean, I had no idea about anything. I mean, I had said, with the institution. I mean, I never questioned authority prior to that. Now I don't
Well,
trust anything. I don't trust anything, Martin.
in science we always have to question authority, uh, and we should use data and proper analysis to find what the truth is, not by believing in an authority.
Yeah, the Great Barrington Declaration. That it's still mentioned. I still hear about it all the time. And how does it make you feel that it's still being brought up and just the work that you guys did, putting that out there, especially at that time when you guys released it.
Yeah, so there wasn't anything novel in it. This was just basic principles of public health. But I think it was sorely needed because there were a lot of people in the public who knew that something was wrong. They're smart enough to understand that. But whenever they will sort of complain or say something, they say, well, what do you know? You're not a scientist. Listen to Fauci. So I think the Great Barrington Declaration gave these thousands of people in the public like a sword and a shield to say, well, we have these three well-known professors from reasonably respectable universities, Stanford, Oxford, and Harvard, who actually agree with me. And so there's no consensus within the scientific community. So I think it sort of it helped. By itself, it didn't do anything, but it really helped thousands of members of the public to argue the case against lockdowns and for focus protection.
Yeah, and I always, and I wonder, would people willingly lock down again or comply if another type of pandemic was presented to them? Do you think people have learned, Martin?
I think so. I don't think they will get away with lockdowns again.
They they've tried last year, right, with a variety of different the monkeypox they talked about that was going to be a concern. Different variety of strains of COVID. Um, so and people are not buying it. You wonder though if they wouldn't have if people would have pushed back so early, where would we be at today?
No, that's a scary thought. If we hadn't been able to push back, the lockdowns would have lasted longer, and the consequences would have been much more severe.
The so your journal's coming out in a month, right? You anticipate in the next month,
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah.
and what would be the frequency for how often it gets published? Articles get put out.
It will be an online journal, so they will be published as they are as they come in. But we hope to have maybe at least to start about 10 pieces in every issue, and maybe start every other month, and then we'll go to every month eventually.
What is your focus right now in terms of if you the first article you're going to publish?
It will be all areas of public health. There will be some things on vaccine in the first issue, but it will also be other things. There are some things that will be very interesting and exciting for the public, and there will be other articles that might be very important but kind of boring for the public because it's some obscure aspects of public health. But science will consist of both of those things. So, but it's a scientific journal for science for public health scientists.
Can you share a little exclusive coffee and Mike exclusive? What people the general public might find more interesting that you're going to put out there?
Well, there will be one evaluating the clinical trials that were done for the COVID vaccine because they were not done the way they should have been done. So there will be one article about what went wrong with the COVID vaccine trials.
Yeah, that and how that was pushed out so quickly. And I mean, I had Brooke Jackson on a while back, and it doesn't seem like her legal cases are they've been getting shot down too. Do you know Brooke?
I had never met. No, we've
Oh,
never met.
know of her?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I never met.
yeah,
No.
yeah. But what were some of the in the trials in your research that the process that should have steps that were missed?
So one is that they showed that there was about 95% efficacy against symptomatic COVID disease. But that's not what we care about. We don't care if I don't care about if you're home for a few days from work, in bed for a few days. That's not what's important. What's important is that you don't die or that you're not hospitalized. So they did the trials for symptomatic COVID infection, even though that's not the important thing. They did not evaluate mortality from COVID, which is what is the most important thing. And they could easily have designed the trial for to look at mortality by recruiting more older people, because they recruited mostly young and middle-aged adults who would survive whether they because the risk of dying from COVID at those ages is so small, so they will survive whether they get the vaccine or the placebo. So they should have recruited more older people, and then we would have known if it actually, from the trials, if it actually prevented COVID mortality, and that's what's important. I think they also should have had a component where they looked at transmission. They could have, as they recruited people to the trial, they could also have recruited like the spouse of people, and then they could have tested, did the spouse get infected, and were they more likely to get infected whether the person had the vaccine or the placebo, and that way we could evaluate it if the vaccine reduces transmission or not in the clinical trials. But they never even attempted to do that. So the trials had no information about whether the vaccine reduced transmission or not. And actually, a vaccine could go either way. A vaccine can actually reduce symptoms but increase transmission, because suppose it reduces symptoms, and that means people are out and about, going to work and so on, instead of staying at home, and so less symptom could actually mean more transmission. So it could go either way with transmission for a vaccine, and they never bothered to evaluate that. They just sort of automatically assumed that it would reduce transmission without having any knowledge about that from the clinical trials.
Do you think that was intentional?
Um, I think it was intentional not to look at transmission because they certainly could have done so. I think it also was intentional to recruit mostly younger people rather than older people. Uh, but I think it was not good science to do that. And FDA should have put their foot down and demanded a proper trial.
Padding the numbers, right? Like setting it up to where the formula, to where it was, you'd be able to accelerate the trials to get it out there in the market. It sounds similar to what, the COVID deaths, how they were miscalculating or, going back and changing death statuses on people and marking it as COVID.
So by recruiting more older people instead of young people, they could have done the trial at the same in the same time frame. It wouldn't have taken any longer, but they would have had, if we would have information about mortality. But sometimes I think they thought it would be easier to show symptomatic reduction in symptomatic disease, and they decided that that's what's going to be enough for FDA approval. And I guess the Pfizer Moderna was right. They did get the approval based on that very weak and limited information. So it might have been a smart business decision. It certainly wasn't a smart public health decision.
No, because look at how many people have been injured from this. I've had people on here that young people. I've told the story. This girl who lives up in Flagstaff, and I'm in Phoenix, and she's a runner. Ironically, she just took six at a 50K or 50-mile race in DC area like 2 weeks ago. But she had
Okay.
gotten one shot of the Moderna, and right when it was being rolled out, and couldn't drive home. And then turned out she had had 6 or 7 blood clots, I believe, appendicitis, and COVID just from getting one of those shots.
Yeah, I mean, one of the adverse reactions we know about from the mRNA vaccines is myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart, and especially in younger people. Not so much in older, especially in younger people, and especially in young men or young boys. So so there are certainly adverse reactions to the vaccines.
Yeah, and do you think the fallout from this, in terms of the injured, is we're at the peak, past the peak, or is this one of those things that's going to you could carry with us for years?
I don't know. Um, I mean, when you look at one thing that's going to carry with us for years or decades is the hesitation about vaccinations in general because FDA and CDC messed up about these COVID vaccines and the vaccine mandates. That has and making sort of nonsensical decisions, force giving mandates, for example, to people who already had COVID, who already because you have superior immunity from having had COVID naturally than from a vaccine. I mean, the vaccine is sort of meant to mimic the immunity you get from having had a disease without having to go through being sick, without risking to die, for example. So that's the beauty of vaccines, that you can get some protection without having to take the risk of dying from the disease. But if you already had the disease and recovered, there's no reason to also get the vaccine because you already have superior immunity. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the measles vaccine, but I never had it myself. And the reason is I had measles when I was a young kid. So after that, having had measles, I don't need the vaccine. Um, so, and we've known about this natural infection-acquired immunity for almost 2,500 years since the Athenian plague in 430 BC. So this is not new scientific knowledge. But suddenly, universities and CDC and so on, they ignored this basic scientific knowledge when they mandated everybody to get the vaccine. So that's nonsensical. It's very unscientific and it's also unethical. If you believe in vaccines and think they're important, then you should give it to people who need it, not to people who don't need it. And to give it to people who don't need it is unethical if there are people who need it who haven't gotten it when there's a shortage of vaccines. So it was both unscientific and unethical with these vaccine mandates. So, but then of course, very naturally, people started questioning, oh, okay, if they lie to us about the COVID vaccine, are they also lying to us about other vaccines? So it's a very natural reaction from the public to not question everything about vaccines and be much more skeptical about them.
Yeah, even I mean, I grew up. It was the whole there was a polio vaccine, and I mean, what are your thoughts on that now?
I think the polio vaccine is an important vaccine for children.
It's yeah, because like you said, it's hard to know what to believe and what not to believe anymore. And even so, what about flu shots as we're in the winter season? Is your take any different on that since COVID?
It depends on the years. Some years the flu shot works well, and some other years it doesn't work very well. So, but we usually don't know that until after the season is over.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't heard much about flu, or even just in my personal life, a lot of people getting sick as of yet this year.
Uh, yeah, so sometimes this flu season comes earlier and sometimes it comes later. So sometimes it will start in November, but sometimes it doesn't start until later than that. So, but who knows how it will be this season?
So now we're wrapping up the end of the year. You've got your journal coming out. What else? What else is on tap for you? I'd love to see you at NIH, Martin. Selfishly, but
Well, we'll see what happens. I will uh, I will I have some ideas how to reform NIH, so I'm writing a little article about that right now. So,
can you share any more Coffee and Mike exclusives on that?
well, one is the thing I mentioned about um, uh, uh, say when somebody publish research funded by NIH, it should be open access, of course, but it should also be open peer review, so that we actually get an evaluation of that research. So I think that's an important part. I think NIH should set up a COVID commission. There was actually an attempt to put up a COVID commission a few years ago, but I think when they realized what a mistake the government had been making, they sort of shut it down. They didn't proceed with it. So we have to sort of start. I think NIH is the great perfect organization to actually evaluate that. It's sort of on uh, their it's in within their responsibility, I think, to part of their mandate to evaluate these things. So,
Who would be on your COVID commission if you could pick a team?
well, I think they should interview people who were active during COVID, but probably it should probably be led by somebody who is maybe not an infectious disease epidemiologist, but who is in some other medical field, who can take a more neutral uh, take on it, and then interview various people who were instrumental. Fauci, Collins, CDC directors Valensky and Redfield, and so on, as well as those of us who were critical of the approach that was taken in the U.S.
Yeah, you don't hear about Fauci anymore either. I feel like I haven't seen that name or on TV or anything in a while.
Oh, I'm sorry for mentioning him then.
Oh. I'm sorry. No, but he just kind of just dropped off the face of the earth.
Well, I think that's true for all the people, almost all the people who were advocating school closures and lockdowns and vaccine mandates. They're basically gone silent. Whether consciously or not, I think they realize it's deep down inside that it was messed up, and they probably just want to forget about the whole thing and continue with their regular research because they know at least intuitively that they messed up. So it's very natural they go silent.
How about accountability for these people, for Fauci and Collins, and you optimistic that might occur with this new administration?
I don't know, and I think that's for the lawyers to deal with. For example, if there has been perjury when they testify to Congress, for example. I don't think there should be any consequences for being wrong about science because that's part of science. I think there should be consequences for lying under oath or retracting papers that were wrong. There should also be consequences for censoring or bullying. Those things are unacceptable, and that sort of would be killing science or the scientific community. But for just being wrong, I don't think there should be any consequences because that happens all the time in science. You have something, you don't know what the solution is, what the correct is, and you have people have different ideas, then you test them, and eventually one turns out to be right, another wrong. That's part of science. So that there should be no consequences for that, but there should be consequences for lying under oath or for fraud or for censoring or bullying.
How much did Twitter X? Didn't you guys zapped off there before Elon bought it, right? Weren't you? Didn't your account get deactivated?
I was censored multiple times, and it was deactivated for I think three or 4 weeks at one point.
Was that before
And
Elon?
same thing with that was before the Elon Musk. Yeah. Same with LinkedIn. I was censored there, and also I was my account was closed down until eventually they reestablished it. I was censored by YouTube, Facebook, TikTok. So, and we know that at least one of these cases it was at the behest of the federal government who did it.
Yeah, I'm debating if I should put this episode on YouTube. I started posting all my stuff on there. I used from the beginning, or when I started putting videos on Rumble, because my thought was, well, YouTube, they'll just kill it. They'll kill the channel in any given moment. And
Yeah.
just last week, a friend of mine had urged me to do it. He's like, you start putting them up there, who cares, whatever. I'm like, okay, that's fine. It's a huge audience. I go on YouTube a lot, just watching stuff. And I'm like, we'll see what happens. Martin, I'm not kidding you. Within a couple hours, I got an episode pulled.
Uh-oh. Yeah. I'm not surprised, but it's very tragic.
And then
And YouTube is owned by Google, so this is Google who is doing this.
I don't know why I was naive thinking that there was an Overton window now, that maybe they're loosening up stuff. Because you can talk about vaccines more now than you could have 3 years ago. So I thought maybe they're loosening up the parameters and allowing some things to get through. And I don't even think we were talking about, I mean, I know we weren't talking about vaccines, but they sent me a notification saying the episode was banned for medical misinformation, but you can appeal it. So I sent the appeal. You can't write anything. Send the appeal. Within 5 minutes, they denied it, and they just took the episode down.
Well, if they're concerned about misinformation, then they should pull a lot of stuff the CDC and NIH officials and FDA put out there. So,
How much is X or Twitter, had an effect on you and getting the message out since Elon took it over? Or what are your thoughts on it now?
well, since Elon Musk took it over, I haven't been worried about censoring there. So that's nice to be able to say what I want. Free speech is wonderful, I think. But even during the time when before Elon Musk, during the early years like in 2020 and 21, even though I was censored, it actually was hugely important to get out the message about what was wrong with the pandemic. Um, when the pandemic started, I had a Twitter account with a few hundred followers, maybe 400 or so. But they came out this Swedish study showing that it was safe to keep schools open, that Sweden didn't close the schools or daycare centers for ages 1 to 15 during the spring of 2020. And there was not a single COVID death, and the teachers were no higher risk than other professions. So this was important to know in the US because the Swedish Public Health Agency came out with a report. So I wasn't able to publish it in I wasn't able to publish it in any sort of publications. So I figured that Twitter was the only way to get it out there. So I started to post it, this Swedish report, multiple times on various discussions of school closings. And I think that was very so Twitter was very useful for that.
Yeah, it's become a. Go ahead. If you get your water, I'll just. Can you still hear me while I'm talking?
Yeah, I can agree with.
No, it's Twitter to me has become uh, essential in terms of getting information out because you look back on now you look back on them just zapping people. I'm surprised that I don't think Jay he didn't get did he get censored and deplatformed on there?
So both Jay and I were shadow banned on Twitter at different times. I was shadow banned that summer of 2020 when I posted about schools. So when I posted something, it didn't take off. They didn't sort of remove the post, but they made sure it didn't spread. Also that summer, eventually in August, actually, I managed to publish the piece about the Swedish uh, experience with the school, not closing down the schools in Sweden. And I managed to publish at CNN, but not the one you think, the CNN Espanol, because I know how to speak, I know Spanish, I could write it in Spanish, and CNN Espanol was willing to publish it, but CNN English didn't want it. So,
How did it get through in CNN Espanol but not in English?
well, they were more open-minded. I think they're different editors, so they were more open-minded in Spanish, the Spanish version.
Did it stay up or did it get taken down?
No, it stayed up. It's still up there. So people who know Spanish, they could read this information, but if you don't know Spanish, you couldn't in the US. So,
Yeah, with Twitter, I mean, my friend Kat Lindley and Lynn Finn, they had like 8 or 9 accounts. They kept getting zapped and creating new accounts, like
yeah.
different emails. I can't believe that even somebody like you or Jay, because you would think there'd be a dedicated team member to follow, like say medical professions with huge audiences. Why wouldn't they just remove your account rather than shadow ban you?
I don't know, but they can do shadow banning in sort of secret. Nobody knows. Uh, until it wasn't until Elon Musk took over that they looked at like this and found out that we had been shadow banned. But while it was unknown when it happened, you can suspect it, but you don't know about it because it doesn't show up. If they do actually do censor somewhere close in the account, then of course it becomes public. So it's shadow banning is sort of a uh, a way to do a form of censoring, but more discreetly without being people knowing about it.
Yeah, I would love to see. Wouldn't it'd be interesting to watch somebody shadow ban right behind the computer? How you what mechanisms you'd be able to do to turn the volume down on somebody's account so the engagement is very low.
Yeah. Yeah, they put us what called a trans blacklist.
Oh, is that what it is? I didn't even know that. So you were on that list?
That's what they did. They put both me and Jay on a trans blacklist so that our post cannot be trending. So it can still be seen by people who sort of specifically follows, but not more generally.
And you did you get your LinkedIn account back then?
I did, yeah. They restored it. They were because it became a media attention, and then they restored it after a few days.
Now, so how about your engagement on there? Do you
Um,
post?
I post sometimes, yeah,
Is there engagement
but
on it, or
not
is
as
it?
much as Twitter.
Do you have engagement on it though, or do you find it's being suppressed?
I don't know if LinkedIn suppresses or not at this point. It's unknown. But I mean, I get many positive comments when I post things there. So other people who are on LinkedIn, they appreciate the postings I do.
Yeah, it's too bad Elon couldn't buy Google. Although it seems like he's doing his own digital platform through X.
Yeah.
So
Well, I hope that all of these platforms will abandon censoring at some point.
how much do you think, in the last 2 years or last several years, alt media has played a part in getting the message out versus mainstream?
Hugely important. That's what got the message out about the truth about the pandemic. The mainstream media did not do much. There were some exceptions. I think Newsweek and Wall Street Journal, for example, they did some good journalism about the pandemic.
Who do you follow for your information?
Well, on Twitter, I follow a few thousand people. So, but one thing that I do is I do a conscious effort to read what my those people who have different views say. So I've always consciously and with great interest read like the people who are advocating for school closures and lockdowns. I would very carefully read what they had to wrote because I need to know how they think and make sure that I didn't mess up anything. So I didn't think the arguments were convincing at all, but I have to read them to. So I think it's very important to read those people who are having an opposite view.
What about now in terms of where you're getting your news and information from? You recommend? I would be curious on who, like either whose Twitter handles you follow or any websites that you go to.
I think Unheard is a very good. Um, they have good information on many topics. They did a great job during the pandemic. It's a British uh, new online news organization.
Any journalists that you would recommend?
Oh, there are many good journalists. David Zweig, Matt Taibbi, um, uh, and many others. Jeannie Lancer is a very good journalist on medical things. Lee Fang, Mike Tracy.
Yeah,
So
I like Mike Tracy. Lee Fang, I feel I haven't seen him in my feed in a little while. The problem is when you follow too many people, then you start losing track of some of the other ones that you don't see them in your rotation.
yeah.
Well, it's so describe how you're feeling then as we come into 25, Martin.
Well,
Optimistic,
I'm more
hopeful.
optimistic than ever about the future of the scientific community with Marty as the head of FDA and Jay as the head of NIH, as long as they get confirmed by the Senate. So I think And I think the scientific community has no choice but to sort of recognize the mistake made and try to restore integrity and confidence in the public. So,
Yeah, we didn't even get any chance to ask you what were your thoughts when Marty got that nomination.
oh, I was thrilled. I think he'll be fantastic as the head of FDA. And there uh, needs to be changed there. And I have colleagues at FDA, and they were who also were excited about it. So
Where does that agency start with cleaning it up, in your opinion?
to be more rigorous about the approval of drugs and vaccines, have a more evidence-based approach to it, and I think making sure that uh, when there needs to be less rotation between personnel between the FDA and the pharmaceutical industry. Like former FDA director Scott Gottlieb, he went on to go on the be on the board of Pfizer. So that kind of rotation um, between FDA and pharmaceutical companies, I think, should end.
Yeah, I mean, how is that not a conflict of interest that you're able to do that?
Uh, it is so, and it's not only at the top level. There's also at the mid level that there are people go from FDA to the pharmaceutical industry.
What about Robert Kennedy? Him being selected.
Well, I think he said three things that he wants to do. I think all of those are very, very important. One is to restore evidence-based medicine as critically important. It went out the window during the pandemic, and that has to be restored. So that's great, I think. The second one he said is to reduce conflict of interest. One we talked about FDA, but there's similar in other agencies. Um, we have to uh, we have to judge medicine independently without conflict of interest from pharmaceutical companies or device manufacturers or others. And then the third one is the chronic disease in children, allergy, asthma, autism, ADHD, and so on. And that's a huge challenge because it's not an easy thing to do, but it's something we really have to put efforts to resolve.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody about growing up, I didn't know anybody that had autoimmune disorders or or attention deficit. I don't. I mean, I might have had it because I had a hard time just paying attention in school. But to me, one of the things is, and not that there's a one isolated problem that solves it, but man, these phones and just kids be just growing up in front of these blue screens. And I don't know how you can't eliminate it, and I don't really have a viable solution. But you're talking about that, and then talking about the food that these kids eat.
Well, I have three kids. The youngest ones are both 9 years old, and they don't have a phone yet. And I'll try to keep the phones away from them for as long as I can.
How long do you think you could do it for?
I don't know. We'll see.
Taking it day by day.
Taking it day by day.
Well, and also too from the food standpoint, I mean, you see what I, I mean at the store. I see what these parents with their kids they're buying, and it's just we have to do better as a society. But it comes down to the individual though too. Nobody wants to hold themselves accountable, like I said earlier.
Well, I think it's partly individuals, but it's also partly a public health issue that we have to take joint efforts at. So I think it's both. Sometimes there's not much choice, like the ingredients in the foods and so on. So and the school lunches and school snacks, they're all part of it.
It's hard to defeat the food scientist with some of this stuff. They say the internet's undefeated. The food scientists are undefeated too.
Yeah.
Where can people find?
Well,
Oh, God.
it's important to eat vegetables and fruits. So and it tastes great.
Do you live by a certain way of eating?
Um, Not a particular program, but I do serve my kids a lot of vegetables,
And stay away from
and
the
they like them because that's what they're used to. So
yeah. Yeah,
yeah, big.
you don't allow a lot of the snacky stuff, the processed snacky stuff.
Yeah, no, but they we do ice cream. That's allowed, and sometimes we make popcorn. But I try to avoid uh, other junk food.
Where can people find you, Martin?
You can find me on Twitter. My handle is Martin Kulldorff. You can find me on LinkedIn. So, but Twitter is the best place to find me.
How exciting. When will Jay's confirmation be?
Well, so the formal nomination will not happen until January 20th when Trump is inaugurated. So that's when the formal nomination will be, and then there will be a hearing by the Senate. And of course, they have many hearings to do. So I don't know exactly what the schedule is there, but it will be sometime after January 20th.
Well, I'm guessing that, and I don't know if you would know the answer, but Jay would be at the inauguration then, right?
I don't know. You have to ask him.
Yeah, no, I just wonder if it's a standard for the nominees to go to the inauguration.
I don't know.
Will you be attending?
No, I won't be. I can watch it on TV. That's good enough for me.
I have to tell you, somebody else said, he said that'd be a really neat event to be at. And I'm like, no, that's a lot of people. And and as a general public, like I couldn't even imagine parking and how far you'd have to walk to get to, where you would have to park and to walk to get to where the inauguration is.
Well, you can probably take the metro. Uh, so park outside of DC and then take the metro in. That'll probably work.
That's a lot of people. I'm with you. I think I'll skip that. Martin, thank you so much for doing this. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Are you staying in town? Going anywhere? Doing anything?
I'm staying in town. So Merry Christmas. I'll probably do some skiing with my kids.
I appreciate as always you making time for me, and look forward to more conversations ahead. And can't wait for this for your journal to come out.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Mic drop.
Always a
Thanks, Martin. Mic drop.